My question is about the occupation, the Syrian occupation yesterday. They occupied new parts of Quneitra, which was liberated, and the Syrian part of Haramoun Mountain. This is a new movement in this region since the 70s, and also they ordered 5 villages in the southern Syria. They are preventing them to leave their houses. 5 villages. So how do you see this new changes in this part of Syria? Thank you.
Merci. Je reviens à la Syrie aussi. Donc, si je comprends bien, est-ce qu'on a l'intention d'enlever le HTS, qui est considéré par les Nations Unies comme une organisation terroriste, qui est, à mon avis, ou bien à ma connaissance, qu'il n'y a aucun groupe des sociétés civiles qui appartient à HTS. C'est un groupe militaire et accusé de crimes de guerre, crimes contre l'humanité. Est-ce que cela, aujourd'hui, ça a changé pour vous? Une deuxième question, le 7 octobre 2023, quelques semaines après, vous nous avez informé qu'il y a eu des viols commis par les organisations palestiniennes contre les Israéliennes durant le 7 octobre. Est-ce qu'aujourd'hui, on a des preuves tangibles? Est-ce que vous confirmez toujours ces faits? Merci beaucoup.
Yeah, thanks for taking a question. I wanted to ask about, you mentioned the state of democracy a little bit. If you could say a little bit more about that in this year of numerous elections where there's been this tilt towards more authoritarianism, and also about the impact of what seems to be an increasing number of billionaires who are controlling the media and also having more political influence, if you would consider someone like Elon Musk as, for instance, an oligarch now in the way things are turning out in the US. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, High Commissioner.
Look, as I mentioned before, what is extremely important at this point in time is to ensure that the territorial integrity, the sovereignty, the unity and the independence of Syria are restored. And this means that there is a process, an internal process that is absolutely needed, which brings all the actors together. I mean, the various civil society, the different armed groups, the existing state institutions, in a process that defines the future of the country. That's the internal process, but there needs to also be an external process of ensuring that all those who are currently in any way impinging on the sovereignty of the country, that there are negotiations to ensure that indeed the sovereignty of the country is restored and the territorial integrity is restored. And these are two, they are related, but these are two very important processes that need to happen. And you saw the special envoy, Geir Pedersen, of the Secretary General is embarking precisely on this process. I mean, as I mentioned, it's not about one particular armed group, and that's, by the way, a decision of the Security Council. It's not a decision that the High Commissioner for Human Rights takes, whether someone ends up on a list. But I think what is more important is that there is, now that this regime has fallen, and these are very, very fraught transition periods always. We have seen it in many other countries around the world, that all actors, all civil actors, the people from outside, the ones who have followed this, all the journalists that are now reporting on it, really come together and really help the country transition. And this has to be so much nationally owned and include all segments of the society. And I mean, we always, the Security Council, as you know, has pronounced itself on the need to involve women in peace processes, and I hope very much that this is going to be the case, and indeed that I've met myself over the years many Syrian women who became refugees, and one thing that I've always taken away from that experience was precisely that they told me they often learned about solidarity because of what they went through, and that they had a lot of social cohesion among themselves, and they told me that when they go back, because they have become so much stronger and more resilient, when they go back they want to have a say in the type of Syria of the future. And I hope that these women will have a chance to sit at the negotiation table of crafting a Syria that is built on human rights and strong institutions. And I think that is very clear. Look, on the yes, it is very clear to us that indeed sexual violence was perpetrated by these groups, by these armed groups on the 7th of October. And I have condemned it, as I have condemned all the other violations that we have seen. But indeed, that is confirmed. On the state, well, look, we have of course seen many elections this year, and what I take away from looking at what's happening around the world, there's a certain malaise that we see within populations. And it's a malaise about not being taken seriously, about deep-seated grievances, about all kinds of things that when you actually go into an electoral period, some, unfortunately, have manipulated. They have taken advantage of these malaise, and they have taken advantage of grievances in a way that they offer solutions to it that, frankly, may not work out. And unfortunately, this has also affected human rights in some ways. And we have forgotten that human rights is about adequate housing, is about access to education, is about access to healthcare. These are all fundamental human rights issues. And I wish that as we go into the future, that human rights will be seen as what they are, affecting each and everyone's lives, that demanding that requires, and this is also a call to the political elites around the world, including the mainstream ones, they have to take seriously what people feel, but they should also find ways and means to create again a free and open public space that allows for debates to occur where you agree to disagree, but you can at least have a debate, and where the debate is based on facts and evidence, and not based on hearsay, conspiracy theories, and what I often term throwing the glitter in the eyes of the others. And there, of course, you as media play an extremely important point, because what we have seen is indeed a tsunami of disinformation in many different platforms, including the social media platforms, and not enough has been done about stemming this and making sure that there is more analysis about where this disinformation leads to, because disinformation and frankly a non-evidence-based public debate is extremely dangerous, and because otherwise you will see it almost atomized within societies, and we need precisely the opposite. We need an open and free public space, and free and independent media play an extremely important role. Look, on the private sector, or especially, I would say, big tech companies more generally, they have become very powerful actors. There's no doubt about that. As you know, I've engaged with them. I went to Silicon Valley earlier this year. For us, it's important to be in contact with them, but it is also important, and the Global Digital Compact in a way did this, to show that we need a basic consensus around the incredible opportunities of the digital world, but also the incredible risks. And it was very good that all states decided that the risks are very much linked to human rights. And as a result, we will do even more work, both with the companies, because of the incredible power that they wield, but also with governments and regulators and all the international organizations that are involved in it, so that indeed there are guardrails in place so that we are not seeing a further erosion of public space, of fundamental understandings of facts, and of making sure that these areas are not used to incite more violence and hatred.
We have next Emma, Gabrielle, and Catherine.
Good morning, High Commissioner. You mentioned headwinds ahead for your office. Could you elaborate on what you meant, and does it have anything to do with the change of administration in the US? Thank you.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner, for coming. Gabriela Sotomayor, Proceso, Mexico. I want to know your opinion on the new reform in Mexico for the judiciary power in Mexico, where judges will be elected by vote and not for their capacity. So it is in jeopardy the independence of powers and therefore maybe democracy. I don't know. What do you think? Also, the killing of human rights defenders in Mexico, like the last one of a priest in Chiapas. And I have another question, but...
Yes, Catherine Fiancombo-Conga, France 24. I have a question related to the BRICS. As the vision of the BRICS is now extending to global politics, do your office have contacts or is working with this organization to help it to uphold its commitments to human rights? Thank you.
Please, High Commissioner.
Well, the headwinds are frankly ones that, if you look at the state of the world today, that's what I mean by headwinds. And to be honest, it's very much related to the fact that we have this, what I mentioned before, this proliferation of conflicts. We see that hardly any of them have an end in sight. Well, let's see what happens now in Syria. But it's also headwinds when it comes precisely what I also mentioned before, is this loss of public space, open public space. Because any society, any social cohesion in a society is only then guaranteed if you have an open and safe public space. And that I'm afraid we see less and less of it, and we see, you look at what just happened in Romania, look at what happened in countries in different electoral cycles around the world, in Europe and North America, but also in other parts of the world. And I think these are headwinds that go to the heart of the message of human rights, because we can only really survive as humanity if we are built on principles and values, and if these principles and values are shared. I believe they still are, but there are attempts to chip away from it, and that's dangerous, especially, that's why I'm always talking about the erosion of the international legal framework. We need to be very guarded about this. Look, when it comes to, you mentioned also the US, obviously we aim to engage with whatever new administration comes in. That's part of our job. Let's also not forget that irrespective of a political change in government, that obviously the obligations that states have in terms of human rights remain. They don't change because you have a different political leadership, and we will continue to work with also the new administration on those issues that have come up in various reports, including sexual and reproductive health rights, areas of minority, the migration issue, the refugee issue, women's rights, death penalty, and so forth. So for us, that doesn't stop with a new administration. And as I said, it's also important to make sure that human rights are not understood as ideological or belonging to one party or the other. They belong to all of us, and we need to do precisely that type of work, and we want to work, and we hope very much that the new administration also sees UN and human rights as a partner. On Mexico, you probably saw this, I have made a statement on those constitutional reform issues that are currently being discussed. We have seen reforms that want to strengthen women's rights, for example, gender equality, but also the rights of indigenous people and Afro-Mexicans. I remain concerned about the judicial reform. I've made that very clear, because we fear that some of the provisions that are currently there risk seriously undermining the independence of the judiciary, but also its ability to effectively uphold the rule of law. So I have called on decision makers to ensure the independence of the judiciary, to ensure that the candidates who are put forward are people of integrity and ability, with the appropriate trainings and qualifications. And you have also seen I've made comments on the widening of pretrial detention, a mandatory pretrial detention, which we never think is the answer in this type of circumstances. This has been a concern not only in Mexico, but in many other situations as well. In fact, we need almost the contrary. We need to move away from incarceration policies more generally. We are obviously working with the different countries of the BRICS, but we have not been engaged with BRICS as such as a formation of governments, but we are obviously in touch with the governments that constitute BRICS. And the message is always very clear that in whatever form you want to engage on governance and multilateral issues, human rights have to be at their core. And we hope that message comes through loud and clear.
We have Agnes in the room, and Jamie had a quick follow-up, and then we'll go to the platform for 3 questions. So let's start with Agnes and Jamie.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. Agnes from AFP. It's a question on Syria. You mentioned the importance of accountability, and you mentioned the importance of the transition. That should be an internal process. But what about you mentioned that it was a national process. What about the international justice? How much do you think that this issue should be put now on the table, and how much the international justice and should be involved? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Mine is similar. It's an extension. I just wanted to follow up on my question before, because you said it kind of in passing about the fact that, the president, former president, and others in his coterie should be held to account. But will you say here today clearly that you believe that Bashar Assad, that his brother Maher Assad, who has been reputed for much of the mistreatment of many, many people, both of those people should be brought before international justice? Because this is an opportunity that comes rare for international accountability. Is there would you be satisfied if those two people and others in their entourage spend the rest of their days in a dacha somewhere in Russia without having a full accountability for their roles? Or do you think that it's more important to ensure a smooth transition process that's peaceful and put that aside for the moment?
Look, on justice more generally, there are different mechanisms. One mechanism is to ensure that universal jurisdiction is increased, and we have been calling, and in fact a number of countries have established universal jurisdiction for atrocity crimes. We encourage them to do this even more. I mean, I can't remember the exact figure. We can find it for you. I think there are about 40 countries that now have established universal jurisdiction, but I would need to check the exact number. And we have seen cases over the last couple of years of Syrians who were brought to justice in national courts in Germany, France, and elsewhere in Europe. And that process is very important. And it was because of what they had committed, torture, various other human rights violations. This was also possible because precisely of the mechanisms that the international community has established. And it helped to identify not only perpetrators, but it also helped to find the evidence base to bring them to justice. This will have to continue. And we we see in so many situations around the world that, in fact, strengthening domestic systems, including by making sure that universal jurisdiction applies, is going to be extremely important in the future. I have called for the whole of the situation in Syria to be referred to the International Criminal Court. As you know, at the current, the ICC does not currently have jurisdiction, which is why one way to do it would be to get the Security Council to agree to that. Another way of doing it is that the new Syria decides to ratify the ICC statute, in which case the ICC would have jurisdiction. I hope that all of this is again being considered. In fact, we would strongly encourage it, but it is also true that the ICC is not going to replace what needs to happen in Syria itself, is to build up a domestic legal system that allows for fair trials in relation to all those where indeed there are serious grounds to believe that they have committed atrocity crimes. And that goes also for the president or the former president of Syria and whoever was in senior leadership positions. There are indeed serious grounds to believe that they may have committed atrocity crimes, and as a result, yes, they should be brought to justice. And I do not see this different from a transition process. I think we should not confuse peacemaking, transition, finding political solutions from the issue of accountability. We have actually seen that precisely in this type of processes it is important to bring that dimension in, because justice and serving justice and countering impunity is important.